Hello again, everybody. This is Derek, aka Mr. Everything, and I am coming back at you with another Harn video. In today's Harn video, we're going to be looking into mounted combat. Okay, mounted on horseback? Yeah, mostly horseback. But I'm sure that you could figure out some other way to have some other mount, like a hippogriff or a dragon or whatever. Okay, so let's go to the PDF that I have conveniently uploaded to Roll20. We're going to go line by line, and we're going to look at the mounted combat. And so you're going to get a chance to see what the rules say about mounted combat. It is not much different than regular combat. It's there's just a couple of extra added steps and some additional considerations to make when fighting on a mount. Okay, so let's go past the skills. And now we're in combat. Now we've already gone over foot-to-foot combat. We did a long video on this where I showed you I roll to hit, you roll to block, we cross-reference it, it gets us a result of damage or parry or advantage. So you're familiar with all of that. And you're familiar with the combat sequence. Like at the beginning, you get your initiative. Then you get to choose different actions like pass or move or engage or charge. Grope is even an action. Esoteric action for like casting spells, stuff like that. So we went over all that. That's just a reminder. And then the melee attack sequence. You attack, declare, defense, declare, then you roll the dice and you find out what the result is, and then you find out how badly you've been injured. Okay, so initiative, testing, and morale, that's when, if you're fighting a bunch of NPCs, the NPCs will roll each time it's their turn to act, they will roll to see if they act or if they just stand there bewildered, because players have a better understanding. Okay, players are better than normal people, right? Player characters are a hero. They're legendary. They're supposed to be everything you aspire to be, maybe. And so the character knight that's in the game gets to the player, when it's his turn, can decide on his own if he's going to flee, stand there, or attack, right? The NPCs don't get that choice because they have nobody controlling them other than yours truly. So I am not going to, and the game does not expect me to, write up motivations and for 1,000,000 characters across the world and know every instance and every nuance to how they will react to certain things. So they allow the game master to just roll versus their initiative to determine if they act when it's their turn. I think this is a very elegant way to kind of manage the NPCs and put a small limitation on them that could be very impacting in a battle, but it's only a small little impact that the players don't suffer. Okay, so let's go on past initiative. Okay, so here we are, mounted combat. This is where we talk about what we're going to talk about. There are a number of horse breeds, right? This is just one thing I love about Harn, they just add an additional layer. Every opportunity they get, they just add an additional layer of data, right? You don't just say light horse, heavy horse, draft horse, war horse, right? That's not what it is. You have different breeds of horses, and these horses each have different characteristics and stats, um, and horse intelligence and everything else, and like where on the world do they come from and who uses them, and there's just that little extra level of detail. So you can see there's the Rexini, the Hackerdod, the Lankum, the Kanset, the Lodiri, and the Chelney. These are the main horse breeds. They actually put out another book that I think it's in the bestiary maybe. They talk about even more horse breeds. But this one right here, the Rexini, they didn't put these in alphabetical order, and that's a reason. The Rexini is the most popular horse, right? So it's like it right here. It's the most popular war horse that can be found in the feudal cultures, and then each horse has its own various details. Some horses are not even from the island of Harn. They could be from the mainland, but that's not like right here. Originating from a region in Lithia, Lankham, but that doesn't stop them from being used in Harn, because there's always merchants and people importing things, and always wanting the best. They might have bought these horses. They might, a merchant might be in a merchant stall, and he says, I've got this Lankum here, from Corfor on the mainland, and this is how much it is, or whatever. You know what I'm trying to say? So different horses are going to have different characteristics, which they provide you right here, and they tell you approximately how much they would cost, how much they can carry, what their strength is. Something unusual is this move stat. Okay, so you can see that they move around 40, where how fast did your knight in shining armor move? He moves probably about 6, maybe 8 if he's lucky, right? Maybe 5 if he's burdened, right? Got a lot of weight on him, and that's important for encumbrance. It's moving 5 times faster than your knight. So 40, that's not 40 feet, that's 40 hexes. And your the hex is approximately 5 feet. So your character that moves 6 is moving 30 feet, like most other games that you play. And then a horse that moves 40, what is that, 200 feet? So yeah, he's moving 200 feet, and that's only at a trot, because you have, okay, let's see if it's on the next page. Oh yeah, I got to do this. Boop. It is right here, steed movement. At a trot, you take the move times 1. Now, if you just want to walk the horse, it can move half the speed, which would be what, 20? That's still faster. That's still very fast, right? And then a canter would be something that you would kind of, not a gallop. A gallop is, think of it like a sprint, but a canter is moving rapidly. You're doubling that. And so instead of 200 feet, you're moving 400 feet on an initiative roll, on your initiative, right? That's very high, in my opinion. Because you could walk, half speed and still overtake most of these knights. Because a knight with a 6, they basically have the same type of movement. It's called something different. But they could trot at 6. They could walk at 3. They could, I think it's jog at times 2. So they could go 16. And then they could do a sprint at times 3, which is 24. So this horse that's walking is almost going the same speed as a knight sprinting. I kind of learned that that's the case when I was looking at wolves. Wolves have something like a 24 movement, and I was thinking 24, that doesn't make sense. 24 feet? No, that's 24 hexes, my man. Okay, so let's go with the very first thing you do in a mounted combat is you also do your initiatives and all that stuff, right? That's all normal. When mounted, the rider's fatigue and encumbrance penalties are halved. Okay, so if you're riding a horse, but you are personally injured, causing you physical penalties, or if you're carrying a lot of weight, like you're in a joust, so you carry a ton of armor, if there was going to be a penalty, it's halved. So that's like the horse is taking most of that weight from you. Both rider and steed penalties reduce the riding EML because the steed has its own penalties. So if you encumber the steed by wearing a lot of weight and riding him, or if he's carrying a bunch of saddlebags, or if you put a bunch of armor on your horse, he might be encumbered. And if that's the case, he'll receive his own penalty, right? And if the horse has a penalty and you have a penalty, your penalty is halved, but you still add them together, and that becomes a total penalty for the rider, right? So you just don't want to have any encumbrance or whatever on the horse because that's going to give you a penalty. Okay, so initiative and training, whatever. Steed quality is largely measured in steed initiative. If we go up a page, you'll see this INI right there. That is their initiative. And you can see the Rexini has a pretty good initiative. It's at 60. It's not as strong as some of these. Actually, it's the strongest, isn't it? Yeah, the Rexini is the best in strength. Okay, but you can kind of see that. Now let's go up. Oh, wrong place. Wrong way. Okay, steed initiative. An improvable skill. So your steed could be taught maybe through horsecraft or through actual fighting. The horse would actually be, they say steed because it doesn't have to be a horse. It could be, like I said, a hippogriff or a dragon or something like that. Okay. Steed combat training is undertaken by the rider. For each 10 hours of training, the rider can gain 1 skill development roll. In their steed initiative or steed trample or riding. So you can help the steed's initiative go up by training, plus you can improve your own riding skill. And it's trample. Okay, steed initiative is reduced by 10 when a steed has a different rider. Okay, so if this is your horse, but then somebody else jumps on the horse, it'll be reduced by 10. Okay, mounted initiative. Initiative for combat of a mounted rider is his riding skill for that specific steed. A rider afoot or a riderless horse use their own initiatives. So if you jump off your horse, then you have your own initiative. And then the horse would have its own initiative. But when you're on the back of the horse, like this guy right here, you will have your riding skill becomes your initiative. Okay, steed movement. Okay, we already talked a little bit about steed movement, but there is a turning restriction. And you can see right here there's turning. A horse that's at a gallop, okay, I'm being extreme, but if you're charging across a big field, lance down, ready to just blast into some line of pikemen or whatever, if you are cruising across that field, your horse can't turn, right? When it says 60-degree turn, what they're talking about is the hex side. This guy's facing this way. If he wants to be facing this way, that's a 60-degree turn, right? And according to this, he can only turn once every 50 feet. Well, if he's going at 200 feet, right? He's like really hauling ass. He would have to go 10 hexes before he can make a 1 hex turn. So he's making a big circle because he's going so fast. The slower you go, the more often you can turn your mount. And then if you're walking, remember walking is 40. That's why it's 20 actually. That's why I mentioned it. You have no restrictions. You can turn in every square, right? Every hex. Okay. Minimum movement. Steeds have a minimum movement of 1/3 their move. And that's based on your speed. So if you're walking, your minimum movement is, it would be 0. Minimum 0. But once you start trotting and you get a 40 on your movement, now you're going to have to move at least 1/3 of that. So 40 divided by 3 is 13. You have to move 13 to be considered trotting. Why would you want to be considered trotting? Because different speeds give you different bonuses. Okay. But I'm pretty much never going to impart a speed penalty. What I will do is just figure out how fast they moved and then decide what speed they went, you know. And we'll figure it out. And plus, the speed fatigue, the faster you go, the more fatigue you generate. Okay, steed load and encumbrance. A steed has a load rating in pounds, which is what, 10 times your strength? Wait, I don't know what it is. Let's double check. As long as the steed's load, including the rider and gear, does not exceed his load rating, actions by the steed are not penalized. An overloaded steed is subject to encumbrance penalty in the excess. So a steed's encumbrance penalty equals the excess load divided by endurance. That is exactly the same as a character. You have an encumbrance value, and anything over that. Actually, you don't have anything over that. You just have starting at 0. Once every amount of your endurance counts as a -1. Okay. Steed command check. Okay, super important. This is probably the most important part. In mounted combat, a rider declares a mounted action option. Okay, and we'll go into these down here. And then he has to make a steed command check. So basically, he has to roll to see if his horse understands what he's trying to do. It's not automatic, right? So having a higher riding skill, is better, right? If you have no riding skill and you're trying to fight from the back of a horse, you have a chance that the horse doesn't do what you want it to do. Okay, so this is a big disadvantage for someone that's mounted because the horse might not do what you ask it to do. Plus, it might actually balk. If a steed balks, we're going to say tries to throw you off onto the ground, uh, you will become unhorsed. There's no roll. You don't test to see if you're unhorsed. You're just automatically unhorsed. And then you have to check to see if you're injured because you just fell, to the ground on your back, you know. Um, Now, once you pass, if you critical success, it performs the action and you get a +10 to your attack. If it just marginal success, it performs the action. Marginal failure, it still performs the action, but you get a -10. Okay, so you're testing to see if you get a +10 or a -10 or dropped off. Okay, now you could pass. I'm not sure why anybody would want to do that, but if you pass, uh, if you're unengaged, you can still defend normally, right? And you can grope. Now, you can mount or dismount. Mount or dismount in combat with critical success. The rider gains a tactical advantage. Any failure requires an unhorsing roll. So, you try to climb on, that's a riding skill. If you get a critical success, it basically lets you act if you climb on. If you succeed, you climb on, no action. And then if you marginally fail or critically fail, you still climb on, but you test to see if you fall off. Okay, mounted move. You can do a move if you're unengaged. You can engage just like a normal ground combat. And mounted charge. Here it is. You make a canter or gallop move. Now, to make a canter or a gallop, remember there's a minimum. You can't be 3 hexes away and then canter into them. Yeah, the charge distance cannot be less than 1/2 the maximum, right? And must follow a straight path. So usually you don't do a mounted charge, usually, unless you got this big open field that you're coming across. Normally you'll do an engage, right? A mounted engage, because at that point you can walk and talk. No, you can walk or trot. And remember, a trot with this horse is 40 hexes. So you move to engage an enemy character afoot or mounted, and then you may optionally conduct a rider attack or a steed trample. So you can just ride up to them and attack them. But if you charge, you have to be doing a canter or a gallop, and that's going to require, like a gallop, if they go 200 feet or 40 hexes or whatever it is. No, 40 hexes is 200 feet. So if you gallop, you're going 3 times that, 600 feet. You'd need 300 feet to charge into somebody. And that's not usually the case. Okay, so with a engagement, it's the same way. You still have to stop when you enter their engagement zone. And then there's mounted disengage, and then rider attack. Okay, so rider attack is kind of like if you're already beside somebody, like if this guy was right there, you could attack him. The rules talk about being able to attack one side or the other. Usually, it's only the 3 squares to the right. If you're using a sword or an axe or a mace, or I'm imposing my own personal rule that you can attack somebody in this one square right there, this one X. It's like a triangle. This one or these three with a sword, axe, or mace. Now, if you've got a lance, it says that you can attack anybody. You could even attack them if they're there. You're attacking to the side of your horse's head, like maybe in a charge or something. But if he's there, remember your shield is blocking your entire left side, and trying to swing across the shield and the horse's body counts as a minus 40 to hit. And then there's an optional where if they don't have a shield and it's just the horse's body, it's up to the DM. I think I'm going to work on that. I think it's going to be minus 20 to attack to the left, unless you're left-handed, of course. So if you get to rider attack, the rider may attack one adjacent enemy mounted or afoot if already engaged. The steed can move 1 or 2 hexes before the attack is made. So if you're mounted, you don't only get to move you only get to move 1 adjacent, you can actually move 2. So like this horse could move 1, 2, right? I think I'm going to recreate the horse token that I created. I made them 2 hexes deep, and I've noticed that Roll20 wants to try to center it in a hex like this instead of allowing it to fit like that. So, but I think that if I make a 3 hex long token, which it's not, but if I make a 3 hex long token with maybe the butt side in the center hex, just don't draw anything, I think it'll automatically just center. I'll have to test that. Okay, so the rider attack, I think it talks about it right here. Rider attacks are resolved normally in the melee attack table using the applicable weapon. The GM may restrict the hexes which can be attacked by the rider according to the length of the weapon and hand use. A lance can attack any adjacent hex, but a 3-foot long sword or mace held in the right hand has restrictions. Okay. The GM may also discretionally apply a zone for the rider. So make it, there's 3 zones. There's the high, medium, and low. I think that a sword user would attack high, and then maybe if he wanted to go center, he would get a minus, and then he cannot attack low. Or, let me rephrase that. Or, attack. Yeah, so high would be considered his center. Okay, Steed trample basically is just like any other attack, Okay, tactical advantages. If mounted, tactical advantages are gained when the enemy successfully dodges or suffers a knockback or something. Up to 2 tactical advantages may be gained by the rider in a combat round instead of the normal limit of 1. Tactical advantage gained by steed tramples are included in the rider's limit. It is possible for both a rider and a steed to each gain 1 tactical advantage. This also exhausts the rider's limit. Okay, outnumbering. The rider and steed are 2 enemies in combat. They only count as 1 for purposes of outnumbering. Mainly because if you're a defender, you can focus on this one entity, this horse and rider, where on the ground, if you got 2 people running around you, it's harder to know who's going to attack and stuff like that. So outnumber penalties apply to the rider's defense. That's only if he's being outnumbered, right? but not the rider or steed attacks. That's the way it is on foot. Ground attacking, you're not impeded by multiple people around you, just your ability to dodge them. Okay, steed jumps. You can jump a 4-foot high obstacle or an 8-foot wide obstacle without difficulty. Steeds can also jump up to 8 feet high and 24 feet wide with successful jump rolls. A jump roll is made testing the rider's EML. That's his effective mastery level or skill level. So if you're walking, it's -10. But remember, if you're cantering, you get a +10 because you built up speed, and gallops +20. Steed stumbles. Horses may stumble and fall, and then if you're afoot versus mounted, normal attacks, but the aiming zones may be limited. So I think I'm going to do the same thing. I think I'm going to make it low, just like if you're fighting up some stairs, let's say, and you're fighting down. I think someone up a stairs is going to hit their head easier than their feet. And the same thing, if you're down the stairs fighting up, I think you're going to hit the feet easier than the head. So that's the way I would reverse the modifier like that. That's me personally, and that's what I think I'm going to do. Okay. And then attacking steeds. War horses are valuable booty and can usually be ransomed or sold. Many knights consider it immoral to attack horses, although footmen about to be trampled are less reluctant. Okay. Okay, let's talk about this combat real quick. Most of my tutorial videos have been going on for about an hour. So let's see if I can cut that time. Okay, rider defense. So you can attempt to block, dodge, counterstrike, or grapple. When attacked, a mounted defender may choose any of the following defenses. It says the rider leaps from his mount to wrestle with the attacker. This is effectively a counterstrike with unarmed combat. Yeah, if you want to do that, more power to you. A counterstrike is just like on the foot. He's striking you, you strike him back, and then dodge. The rider has 2 dodge options in combat: dodge or duck actions using his own dodge skill, or pass a steed combat check and then attempt the steed to dodge. So it's required of you to make 2 rolls. You got to successfully make your steed check, and then you have to successfully make the steed's dodge. A successful dodge by a steed is presumed to be a successful dodge by the rider, because the horse is moving you out of position. And then block. The rider may attempt to block an attack on himself or his steed. It is not normally possible for a rider to block a strike against his steed with a weapon under 3 feet. So if you've got a sword, you can't block an attack against your horse. But if you've got a lance, you can block an attack against your horse. Now, if it's attacking you, you can block. If you're right-handed, like 99% of the universe, if you are right-handed and you have a shield and you're mounted on your horse and the attack comes in from your right side, any block is going to have to be done with your weapon. If he attacks from this side, which would be your shield side, then I would allow him to block with his shield. If he's got a 2-handed weapon, like a great axe, like this character might have, he's actually holding a spear, a lance type spear. But if you had like a great axe or a great sword, I would allow you to block on either side, because guess what? That's more than a 3-foot weapon. And you're not carrying a shield at that point. You're carrying a 2-handed weapon. Okay, unhorsing, very important. Remember, if it balks, you automatically fall off. If it is, if you suffer any strike before armor, and the strike impact exceeds your personal strength, you have to make a test to see if you're unhorsed. Or if you suffer an injury, it could just be a little bit cut, but if it gets past your armor and causes a little injury, you have to make an unhorsing roll. These unhorsing rolls are also modified by your physical penalties, like the wounds you just received. Now, depending on how fast you're moving and whether or not it was a marginal failure or a critical failure, because if you pass, you didn't fall off, determines how many dice of the impact is. Now, this impact will, you roll the die to see where it hits, and it's assumed to always strike the middle of your body. So, it's not a high shot, it's not a low shot, it's a mid shot. And now just imagine you're hauling ass and then you roll a gallop, you're at a gallop and you fall off. You're taking 66 impact, which is not damage, but that impact rolls, let's say 40, right? You roll a 40 and you apply that to a hit location. Let's say you got 20 armor, you still got 20 through your armor, which is going to cause a serious injury. That's another reason why I would probably walk and trot everywhere I go. I wouldn't go to a canter or a gallop unless there was no risk, That's just me. Now, a riderless horse, remember, NPCs, and this horse is considered an NPC once you drop off of it. It's still an NPC when you're on it, but it has to test its initiative to see what it does, just like a normal bandit would. So if it's a success, it'll stay there with you, not moving. But if it's a failure, it'll wander off. And if it's a critical failure, it'll run off in panic. Okay. Hopefully you guys are all getting all this. Now, we go to jousting. Jousting is not always, it's not what you would expect in Hollywood, right? You don't see, it can be in combat as well. But what they're talking about, because you could have a charge with a lance against another rider with a lance, and you charge him, that's technically considered a joust, but that's with deadly weapons. What they're talking about here is training or tournaments, right? And they use jousting poles, which are, these are extra long. They're extra long, and they're made of very brittle wood. You saw probably the movie The Knight's Tale. They were using jousting poles against each other, and when they struck their opponent, you saw the spear or the lance just break into multiple pieces. And my understanding was that the center of the pole in the movie special effects was that they hollowed out the center and filled it with spaghetti, dry spaghetti. So when it hit and it broke, you saw all these little extra pieces flying everywhere. So I thought that was a cool effect. But there were people online complaining about how they broke too easily, or they were too long, or, well, historically that was all accurate. So the people that were complaining were just showing their ass. Okay, so a jousting pole, compared to a regular lance, jousting poles are much longer, typically 15 feet long, more fragile, they're intended to break, and the tip is padded or fitted with a coronal. So it's got like this metal piece that's flared out like that, like one of your molars. It sticks out like that, so that when it hits something, it doesn't penetrate like a spear point. It smashes so that it's more chance of it breaking and not penetrating your armor to cause injury. So at Lorrainian tournaments, which 90% of your jousting tournaments are Lorrainian, they're fitted with a metal flared van plate. Okay, a van plate is not, or it's the part by where your hand is. So you're not just going at them with like a blunt spear. This is actually, there's a flared bell that goes over your hand, protecting your hand so that if two lances glance each other and they hit this van plate, you'll be protected. And this is the type of armor that a van plate gives to your hand. That's good. See, they're thinking of everything. Okay, jousting armor. Okay, there's no need to really talk about this, but I will. Jousting armor is normal armor. Knights don't joust with some special set of armor. They do in the Renaissance. They do late period. They have specific armor made for jousting. But in this period and in this world, in about the 1200s, people are just wearing their chainmail, right? They might have hardened leather underneath to give them a little extra protection, but it's pretty much the same old junk, right? And in a tournament, you're required to wear a surcoat, like this guy, right? This guy has a surcoat, which is basically a coat that you wear over your armor to show people your pictograph, your heraldry, to let them know who you are. He has it on as well. He's got that blue and gold lion, right? He's wearing a surcoat over his chain, right? Now, these are great helmets. Okay, that's a great helm. That is just a chainmail coif over his head. And these two guys, okay, that looks like it's a great helm as well. Okay, completely covers the head, face, and neck, where this is a half helm, or a three-quarters helm, three-quarters helm. So it's a helmet, just a helmet that covers the skull, and it has a face plate. The back side of his neck is just the chainmail. So that's a three-quarters helm. Great helms are great helms are considered rare in Harn. They're not considered a common sight because of the limited visibility. Now, knights may cover their steeds with caparisons, right? A caparison is a blanket over your horse that shows off your heraldic symbol. It's really, it is a little bit extra armor, but it's mostly for show. Okay. Then they talk about favors and all that good stuff, but that's not important. Now, there is the war saddle, which will protect the jouster's groin, because it's got this wooden plate over his pee-pee, and he gets this kind of armor because a war saddle is actually not just a normal saddle that you see your cowboy westerns riding. It actually has like a metal plate in the front of it that sticks way up to maybe your abdomen, and in the back There's also a back plate that comes up about where your belt line is on both sides, the front and back. So when you sit, you're actually sitting down inside of this saddle, unlike a cowboy saddle. And so it does two things for you. It protects you from your groin because it's striking that wood, which is hardened and wrapped in leather and all kinds of stuff. So it gives you puncture. It gives you like 6 armor puncture in the groin. That's good. But it also gives you a better chance of not being unhorsed, because if you were to fall back, you hit this back plate, it just gives you a +10. Okay, shields. In a joust, this is in a joust, not in a melee combat with a bunch of people in a D&D adventure, right? This is a joust where 2 riders are going at each other and they're tilting in the list. The knight, there's two types of shield, the knight shield and the kite shield. If you're carrying a knight shield and a lance and you're going at somebody, you're not effectively swinging your shield around. You're not blocking. You're just holding it and probably holding the reins as well with that shield. So you don't really have this opportunity to block because you're gripping the reins. But what it does is it gives you additional armor in the shoulder, upper arm, elbow, forearm, HA. I know that's hip, what is that, calf, and HA. It should protect. I'm gonna have to look that up. I can't remember what an HA is. Hand. Okay, that's your hand. Okay. Okay, so any of these locations, if it hits any of those locations, it doesn't penetrate and hurt you. It's like an automatic block, but you have to roll to see if your shield gets damaged. And then van plates, again, that's the thing around your right hand where the lance is, and caparisons provide protection for eyes, muzzle, lower leg, and hoof on the horse. Okay, so the joust sequence. This is, I'm going to breeze through this because this is important for my players if you're watching, because you're going to be knights and you're probably going to, at some point in the campaign, have to attend a tournament. Hint, hint. So you have to make, at the beginning of the joust, you got both people on both sides, right? One player chooses to be the attacker. The other player chooses to be the defender. It doesn't matter which, because you're both technically the attacker. It's just that for this cross-reference, one has to be one and the other has to be the other. You pick a joust tactic. The joust tactics are lunge, evade, deflect, block, pass. Right? Okay. But you can see here that that's got a box. And it's considered an optional rule. Guess what? I'm not using that optional rule. You're charging, you're going for the best hit, period. Okay. Joust, you got to make a Steed command check. And remember, if you get a critical failure, you're automatically unhorsed and you're disqualified. Because when you're unhorsed, at any point, your opponent gets 3 points on his score, and 3 points wins the match. You only make 3 passes against each other, right? After those 3 passes, whoever has the most points wins. So if you were to charge back and forth and strike him and break your lance, 3 times, you would have 3 points. But if you fall off your horse, there's no way you can get more than 2 points. And by falling off your horse, he automatically received 3 points. So he automatically wins. Okay. So joust combat roll. You both make your attack mastery level with your jousting pull. Modified for penalties, because you might be jousting wounded. You might be jousting over encumbered. If you are, you get penalties, you roll, and then depending on if you get critical success, marginal failure, critical failure, you compare it to the other knight, and he gets the same. You could get attacker and defender or both. Attacker, defender, or both gain a strike impact. Impacts are high to reflect charge speed. So what they're saying is you're charging at each other. These are the impacts you get. So if you have a critical success and he has a critical failure, you just did an A4 on your impact, which is pretty good. And then an S, there's a couple of S's there. That means you struck the Steed, right? Injury to an opponent's steed is disqualification. Accidents happen. And then if it's a dot, then no effect. Both of you miss. It was a pass, uneventful pass, right? Okay. So weapon damage. Okay, that's a joust combat roll. Damage check. It says go to combat page 12. We are currently on page 26. I'm not scrolling. When any strike occurs, a weapon damage check is made for the jousting pull. And with a B, both are made. Okay. If your pull breaks, you score 1 point and your opponent may be unhorsed. Then you go to the thing, you unhorse, you roll. But you only unhorse if your impact is more than his strength. So with an A4, I'm going to roll 4d6. And if I can exceed your strength, there's a chance you get knocked off your horse. Okay, strike location. The odds are it's 1, 2, or 3, or 4. And you're rolling a d4. It's the first time I've seen something other than percentile or the d6 being rolled. So if you roll a d4, 1, 2, or 3 means you're striking him on his left side, which, because you're passing and your shield side is the closest to your opponent, the odds of his lance hitting your right side is slim. That's what it says. A 1 in 4 chance. If the location struck is covered by a shield, remember the page before, a shield damage check is made. If the shield breaks, reduce the strike impact by 1 d6. So an A4 would become an A3. Determine the effective impact as above. If the shield does not break, it deflects the strike and there is no effective impact. Okay, so he wants to hit your shield and he wants to break his lance. Injury determination. If effective impact is 1 or more, okay, effective impact is minus your shield. And well, not minus your armor. If it's 1 or more, then determine an injury. All injuries require an unhorsing roll. So remember, if you get an injury, there's a chance you fall off. Also, all of that is modified by physical penalty with the new injury penalty included. Is there a chance for you to die in a joust? Yes. He might have his lance. He rolls a hit location. He hits you in the face. Let's say you've got no armor on the face because you're wearing just a skull cap and not a 3/4 helm. So you get hit in the face. He rolls a critical success and you roll a critical failure. He gets 4 dice. He rolls 4 dice and he compares it to your injury table, dead. It's possible. Okay. Any strike, including one by a broken pole, requires an unhorsing roll. So any strike requires an unhorsing roll. Also, if the strike impact exceeds your strength before armor is reduced, an unhorsing roll is required. So it basically says, I don't know what, that's kind of double. Well, if your opponent is unhorsed, you get 3 points and win the contest. Tactical advantages are ignored. The reason why is, let's say you come by, well, first of all, there's no tactical advantages in this chart anyway, but let's say you're that's why it's ignored. So you fly by, you strike him, and you get a tactical advantage. Well, guess what? You already charged past him, so there's no chance to like strike him a second time. I struck you a second time. And that's as simple as it is. It is pretty easy to do a joust. If you are going to run a joust or participate in a joust, it would be best for you to determine maybe on a separate sheet or on a notepad or something like that, your armor and the modifiers based on your horse and your jousting pole and your skill and all that, because it's not always going to be the same as when you attack. Well, your armor is pretty much going to be the same, but your shield, just note down what I'm trying to say is just note down the areas that your shield protects. Because if it's a knight shield, you mark these down, and if it's a kite shield, you mark these down. It'll let you remember that if you get hit in those locations, and then maybe if you've got a knight's saddle, you might, or war saddle, you might note this as a temporary, because you can add a piece of armor with 6-7, 6-5, and apply it to the groin on your character sheet. But you also might want to put a +10 unhorsing roll on there just to know. You know what I'm saying? And then if you've got a vam plate on your jousting pole, you might want to add these points of armor as well. Maybe a second piece of armor that gives you, or another piece of armor over the hand or something. I don't know. But basically, go into it prepared. That way you don't have to look stuff up as you go. But it seems like it would be pretty easy to figure out. There's only a couple of things you really need to know. You just need to know your riding skill, because you got to make that Steed command check. You need to know your attack value for your jousting pole, and that's pretty much it. You don't really need anything else. And then you'll need to have this chart available, ready to go to look at. But it's pretty easy to read. All right, guys. Well, that was mounted combat and jousting. I can see where there's a big advantage to being on a mount against someone that's not on a mount. But it's mounted versus mounted. I can see where it's not much of an advantage one way or another, but there is a downside for being mounted in that you have to stay mounted. So you got to constantly make your Steed command checks, and you're limited on where you can attack. But the biggest advantage is you get a huge amount of movement. But if movement is not a big concern of yours in a combat with a bunch of bandits in a hilly woodland area, then it might not be good to go riding your horse deep into Sherwood Forest, right? So you would maybe stay on the path, but if you need to go inside the woods, you might dismount, because the disadvantages outweigh the advantages at that point. It's up to you as a player. You know, it's up to if you've got a horse or not, and if you're willing to let that bandit kill your horse, because that is something they can try to do. And if you've got this Rexini, that's 800 pennies. That's a lot. So that's like 1/3 of the amount of money I'm starting my players with. All right, I will catch you in the either next video or next tutorial video. Be sure to stay tuned to this channel because I do have an interview with Grant coming up maybe next week, and I've got my announcement video for my campaign is up as well, so you should check that as well. All right, I'll catch you in the next video.